Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. Of course, we have got ourselves probably the biggest polemic that we've seen in F1 in at least a decade, the penalty incurred by Sebastian Vettel in the Canadian Grand Prix. I've decided to do a little bit of an experiment for us, using iRacing and using the Williams FW31, admittedly not the best analog for a 2019 spec Formula 1 car, but it's the best one we've got in what I consider to be the best sim out there in terms of physics. Let's take a look at what's going on here, how you approach this first chicane at Montreal, and all sorts of different permutations in terms of what could have happened to Sebastian Vettel when he went off there versus what actually did happen. Let's take a look. First, to show you what this corner looks like on a normal lap at normal speeds. So of course, there you see how this looks in real time at a normal speed following the normal racing line. Here's another look in slow motion of that same sequence. You see we approach the corner, we've already done our braking, and we're now in the correct gear. We approach, we take our first apex, we ride a lot of the curb, we let the car point the nose toward the center of the racetrack more or less, and then we turn to the left in the second element of this rather complex corner. It's slightly downhill, and of course it's a right-left chicane, so you don't have all that much margin of error in terms of your line. The natural proclivity of the car here, following physics, is to run a tangent line away from that second apex toward the outside wall where we are now. And again, following the normal racing line, we follow the curbing on the exit, and then we're set up for our approach into the fast left-right sweeper ahead. Now for our first permutation in this. We're going to go off the circuit, admittedly intentionally, in the same place where Sebastian Vettel left the track. We're going to go over the grass on the left-hand side inside of the second apex of this chicane, and then we're going to rejoin. However, we're going to do something differently from what Vettel did. When we're on the grass, we're going to jab the brakes, and you'll see what this does to the car. So quite clearly we have a very different outcome. We're following more or less the same trajectory that Vettel followed, and here we are approaching the corner, we're in the braking zone, and now we're beginning to turn into this blind entrance. We're aiming for that first apex, which again we hit, again riding a lot of that entrance curb, and then we catch some understeer here, and we know we're not going to make the corner, so we turn left, we go over the grass. Now, if we argue that Vettel should have slowed down, here's what happens. The wheels lock because they have no grip on the grass. We try to counter for that. We get the wheels turning again. We immediately get oversteer. We turn into the slide, but we're in an unrecoverable situation, and the car spins. Here we spin off to the left side of the circuit. Lewis Hamilton's behind us. He's now overtaking on his normal racing line, more or less unimpeded by our incident, and here we are on the grass, probably triggering the anti-stall, if not stalling the engine altogether, and we're out of the Grand Prix. Now in this next instance, again, approaching the same corner on the same line, we're going to go off, but initially we're going to induce a bit of oversteer on that initial turn-in, causing us to apply opposite lock and go over the grass. In this situation, the car's already sliding on the grass, which means that we have to apply opposite lock, and taking into account that Vettel should have been on the brakes at this point, we're going to apply the brakes on the grass, and this is what happens. Now in this circumstance, again, in the braking zone on approach, getting our downshifting done, and now we're starting to sight our line into that first apex. We turn in, the car initially starts to bite good, but then immediately we get some oversteer. The back end's turning faster than the front. We counter with opposite lock, the front end grips, and all of a sudden, we are making a beeline for the grass. So we're on the grass, we're still sliding, countering that. We jump on the brakes really quick. And guess what? The fronts lock up, the rears lock up. We're now a passenger. No amount of steering is going to do anything for us. We go tangent to that second apex and we slam into the barrier and, given the situation in the race at this point, into the side of Lewis Hamilton. Both cars now out of the Grand Prix. Now for a slightly different permutation of this. Part of the reasoning that the FIA cited for their imposition of the penalty was the fact that Vettel steered to the right once he got back onto the circuit, which looked like he was turning into the path of Lewis Hamilton deliberately. Well, let's take a look at how you can recover from this situation without steering to the right when you come back onto the circuit. Returning to our slow motion now. In the braking zone, in the approach to the first chicane, our braking is underway, our downshifting is mostly done. Now we turn in toward that first apex on the racing line, approaching the curbing, running a little bit wide of it, I suppose, but hitting that curbing very strongly, and now we realize we're out of position. We take to the grass as an escape route. Now, no throttle, no brake, because both of those inputs is going to result in a spin because the tires have no grip on the grass, turning to the left, rejoining the circuit, trying to gather the car back up, trying not to steer toward the outside wall, little bit of opposite lock for a small slide that set in, but we're still quite close to the outside wall because that's just where inertia carries us. Now for this next sequence, all we're going to do here is try to recover the car. All of the inputs here are based solely on what I'm feeling in the moment and what I think needs to be done to keep this car from spinning and or hitting the barriers. So now you're going to see a lot of opposite lock applied to both directions as we try and stamp out the oversteer and get the car back online. It's a rather striking moment. Again, you see that we take the same approach into the corner online, braking, downshifting, now turning in toward the first apex. We have a bit of understeer settling in. We don't know exactly why Vettel missed this corner. Perhaps it was understeer. Perhaps he just was distracted looking at something else and then realized he was further down the racetrack than he thought he was. But on the grass, the car is reacting very violently to this. We have got oversteer on the grass right now. We're applying opposite lock as the car's going sideways, rejoining the circuit. Lots and lots of oversteer, steering toward that wall, but the car's not turning toward it until the front grips. We apply with more opposite lock to counter that secondary slide as we're trying to recover, and we use the entire width of the road, even picking up a little bit of grass here, to gather the car back up and get us back online. This looks very similar to what actually happened to Vettel. Now for another very similar circumstance, not quite as violent a reaction from the car this time, but again, going onto the grass and rejoining the circuit, just trying to gather the car back up and to keep it from spinning or from going into the wall. So in this circumstance, again, we see that we actually make the apex this time. We're not suffering from understeer. However, as we're turning in here toward the apex, following the normal line, we take a little bit too much apex curb, and we turn the center section of the car into a surfboard. We lose the grip from the suspension. They're in the air, the wheels. So now onto the grass, just trying to recover that excess inertia which pushed us wide. We recover over that apex curb in the second element. We rejoin the circuit. We get a little bit of oversteer induced by us trying to recover that lock, and then we settle the car down. These movements are instinctive. You're just trying to save the car. It's intentional, but it's instinct. Certainly, this is not something you could plan. And for our final sequence, to show you a different outcome in terms of what can happen when things go wrong at this first chicane. Again, just to demonstrate what happens when inertia takes over and the car loses grip as it's cornering. The velocity is always going to continue at a tangent angle relative to the direction of rotation initially when that rotational acceleration is lost. Now, admittedly, what happens here is entirely different from what we saw happen to Sebastian Vettel when he missed this first chicane. Again, on line, braking, downshifting, turning in to that first apex. We're on line, everything looks reasonably good, perhaps a little wide of the apex curves, but there they are. We catch them, and now we get some initial understeer off of the apex. We make the second apex. We turn to follow the road. We're a little bit wide. We turn the car into a surfboard. The suspension's off the ground. We apply opposite lock now because we're spinning, but we can't save things, and we tag that outside wall with the rear end, which then turns the front end into the wall, and we are out of the Grand Prix. Again, inertia just dictates that we follow that tangent line away from the apex of the corner, tangent to our axis of rotation, as acceleration tends to work, and we're out of the Grand Prix. Again, in the context of the race, this would have happened directly in front of Lewis Hamilton, likely resulting in the retirement of both cars. So again, that's another possibility. It didn't happen. So all in all, what ended up happening was probably the best possible outcome. All in all, though, what we saw at the end of the Canadian Grand Prix was far from a good situation. We had the officials come in and change the result of a Grand Prix. Whether the penalty is appropriate or justified or what have you is an entirely different issue at this point. Simply here, I just wanted to show what Sebastian Vettel did, why he did what he did, and also that the ultimate outcome of this, in that both cars were able to continue and finish the Grand Prix, was probably the best thing that could have happened, because we've also demonstrated how easily it could have gone very wrong, not only for Vettel but for both drivers. One other point I want to make, though. I see that there is a lot of vitriol out there in the YouTube community and the Formula One community on the whole. Lots of ad hominem attacks, lots of insults, lots of threatening, lots of cursing and screaming and yelling and everything else. If you want to comment things on my videos, if you want to comment things at my channel or throw things at me on Twitter, be my guest. Have fun with it. I just hope that you're all making yourselves feel better by sharing all of that pent-up rage you have with complete strangers on the internet. For those of you who care, though, I do hope that you found this at very least interesting, if not somewhat useful, and I thank you for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thanks, and of course, we will see you soon.